So we're going to get started. We're going to get started here. I'm Jeff Wasserstrom, and I have one of the great pleasures of the year for me each year is to be part of one of the Amy Wilentz productions, these forum events where we get to have some of the most fascinating people from around the area and around the world to talk about issues of pressing concern. And I'm a specialist in China, Chinese studies, Chinese history, and my role tends to be to say, what about the rest of the world? One thing about American identity, which is not unique to America, is Americans are fairly obsessed with trying to look inward and make sense of themselves and make sense of their country. And we've talked a lot about this. But one of the things that's unusual about America is how much the rest of the world cares about us and what we symbolize, what we stand for good, for bad, sometimes, often for good and bad at the same time. The things that America provokes of various hopes and fears and fantasies and fascination. And so this panel is going to look at how different parts of the world have been seeing us, whatever the us is. We're going to spend less time now worrying about who we are than what we look like and what people think around the world about what the hell is going on here. That's not just something that Americans are asking. So I'm really honored and humbled to be able to have this collection of people up front to be responding to this. So briefly, introductions. The introductions have gone a long time, but to my left, going across here, Dmitry Bykov is a Russian writer, poet, and journalist who's perhaps best known in Russia for his biographies, best-selling and award-winning biography of Pasternak, and also one of Gorky. He has taught school, he's taught at universities, including at UCLA. He's co-written a documentary, written fiction, and been described on the Read Russia website as one of the, quote, most colorful, versatile, and recognizable public intellectuals in Russia. And it says something about differential things, that somebody who would be the most colorful, recognizable, one of the most American public intellectuals might be recognizable in Russia, but we're unlikely to recognize. The one thing about American identity is that we don't look beyond our borders as much as we should. Which brings me to my second guest. Junko Terao is the Asia editor for Internationale magazine, which is a wonderful magazine that I like to describe as being like The Economist in the degree to which it's interested in all parts of the world, and like The Nation in its political orientation to some extent. And I think it's very striking that The Nation doesn't spend much time looking at the rest of the world, and The Economist doesn't spend much time criticizing the international order of the rest of the world. So I think it's a fascinating enterprise. Junko has published, she would say very little in English, but she did have 8 Days in North Korea, a piece published about the 8 days she spent in North Korea, which is exponentially more than most of us have spent time in North Korea. And that was published in the Los Angeles Review of Books, which seems fitting in translation, which is a fitting thing given that they're a co-sponsor of this event. Junko will play double duty to some extent, that she is here representing how Europe and Italy views America, but I may draw her out also on Japan, which she studies and spends time in and has ancestral ties to, also sees us. Next, Carlos Rajo is a journalist who has worked in really every medium of journalism, from writing to being a talking head on television, trying to explain to Spanish language media in various parts of the world, and including in Latin America, what's going on in America. And he also, since we're in the law school, I would be remiss not to say, he has a background in law, has a law degree, He has also, I'd be remiss to say, we're at a university. He has taught at universities in journalism, and we're very lucky to have him here.
Thank you.
Next to him, Xiao Qiang. Last night, one panelist was introduced as this year our MacArthur Genius panelist on that panel. He should have said one of our MacArthur geniuses. Xiao Qiang has received one of that. He's also, I think, the only astrophysicist in this panel. I think the only astrophysicist we have ever had. We've tried to understand many subjects and said, you know, this really shouldn't be so hard. It's not rocket science, but now we finally have a rocket scientist here.
Rocket science and astrophysics are two different.
Okay, come on, let me have my joke. But something happened politically in the late 1980s in China, and even the most self-absorbed Americans tend to know about that because of an image of a man standing in front of a tank. And that led Xiao Qiang to end up spending the rest of the time in his life outside of China. And he's best known to those of us who pay attention to China as the founder and director of the China Digital Times, which is an incredibly important site for translating stories about the news in China and aggregating and analyzing news circulating in English about China. And among other things, it publishes an ongoing updated list, Mini-True, the Ministry of Truth, where it says sort of what the Chinese censors are censoring now. And it does this in a playful way. It also, in the past, we've had political cartoonists as part of this, this forum, and it provides an important place for circulating the work of Chinese political cartoonists in exile, and is becoming very important globally and bilingually, carrying on debate about the things that can't be debated legally within China. So it's great to have you all here. Thanks for coming. And I'm just going to ask a couple of leading questions, and then they're going to give fairly short comments, responses to this, and then we will try to get to questions quite quickly. So the first question is, what do you think is most useful, interesting, or surprising for Americans to know about how the U.S. is seen right now in the country or countries you know best or spend the most time in? So what is something we need to know about what America means now in the countries you're from? Dmitry, do you want to start?
First of all, we'll always belong to the rest of the world, maybe to the hopeless second row. You adopt America maybe as the only country, and all the rest world sits still looking at it without any comments. I must say that maybe that's a kind of national pride, too big for modern Russia in its lousy state. But there is a kind of symmetry between Russia and the USA. We have the same problems, the same history, the same dates. For example, American Civil War went at the same time as Russian struggle against slavery and so on. You had to organize the whole Civil War, and in our country the slavery was banned by just one order of the Tsar. It was rather simple. I must say, yeah, you know, when one person solves all the problems, sometimes it helps in economy of time. Well, but I must say that maybe Russia and America are just like Siam twins, which story you know surely. They were born in, as I recall, 1811, and the main problem was that living in one body, they had different natures, different minds. For example, one of them was typical alcoholic addict. Another one preferred to be sober, but having the common vessels, they always were in the same state. And all his sobriety couldn't help him to get rid of his drunk brother. That's the reason that after a long period of Russian totalitarianism, America gets the same. Maybe destructing the Soviet Union, or maybe dreaming about this destruction. I'm far from such conspirological theories that the USA privately destroyed Communist Party and so on. It was destroyed just by the natural history. But nevertheless, after this destruction, many people, many of my friends in America were happy. I think they couldn't predict the situation, because in our common vessel, very soon, Russian primitivization, simplification of Russian spiritual life after Soviet modernity went to America, because now America is maybe surviving the experience of just the same simplification, of such the same archaic practice. And when we look at it, maybe we feel a kind of Schadenfreude. Because you were so free and so separate and so safe. But maybe, I must say, maybe Trump is just a kind of vaccination, because America was always afraid of fascism. You know that predictions of fascism are really typical for American prose. You can recognize that, for example, in Sinclair Lewis's novel It Can't Happen Here, this horrifying Baz Windrip, by the way, only journalists could destroy his career, which is significant. Then, if you remember Greg Stilson for Stephen King's novel Dead Zone, it's rather important that Stephen King and Sinclair Lewis were both alcoholics, because in their past, because you know that sometimes alcohol addict has a specific feelings of danger, maybe a very thin and intuitive soul. So when we look at American experience now, we can hope that the USA just decided to make an immunization, because maybe Trump is just an attempt to survive fascism in very light, in very funny form. There is no adult nation, there is no mature nation which didn't survive it. But there is huge difference between the 20th century and the 21st one. The 20th century was the age of ideas. Now we can see that you shouldn't have any doctrine, any totalitarian idea to survive fascism. You should not need any party which organizes it. You shouldn't need any leader, because Trump is not a leader. Experience of fascism is just experience of sinful pleasures. When you are trying to overcome your conscience, when you ban your conscience, when you try to get rid of your personal Hyde and leave only your personal Jekyll, if you remember this story. So you remember that Jekyll was so happy when Hyde was jumping over him, from him. It was a kind of ejaculation, sorry. And so now America has the same orgiastic experience. But the problem is that this sinful pleasure is maybe really dangerous for your soul. You can find any taste in it. You can get habit for it. And maybe Trump has all the chances to get the second term, because it's such a pleasure to live under fascism, especially when you have institutions. I must say that in Russia, we can't have fascism, and we never had it, because if you want to overcome your conscience, first of all, you want to have conscience. If you want to break the law, first of all, you must have law. Russia never had it. And so we never had fascism. We had some preliminary circumstances which could lead us to it. Now we look at America with great and pleasant attention.
Thank you. It was really interesting. And first of all, I want to thank you, Jeff, and thank you, UCI, for inviting me I have to say that it's my first time in America after the big change at the White House, and it's a real pleasure to be in California, which seems to be the right place to be in this historical moment in America. So thank you. And well, probably the one interesting thing that Americans could maybe they don't imagine, or they didn't imagine 1 year ago, is that Trump's victory came as a big surprise, of course, in Europe too, and it was nearly a shocking event for us too in Europe too. It was perceived as a bursting, as a disruptive new event, but not a unique one, not an isolated event. I apologize in advance for my English. If you don't understand, just raise your hand and I will try to explain better. And yes, not a unique event, because it was seen as a part of a much more bigger design, much more important trend that started to unfold a few years ago, in 2010, when Viktor Orbán was elected as prime minister in Hungary. And he had been already the prime minister, the head of government, from 1998 to 2002. But it was in 2010 that he won on a nationalistic and an anti-European Union agenda. So it was maybe the first strong sign that something was happening in Europe. Also because he was re-elected in 2014, and at that time the rhetoric, the narrative was also changed. It was an anti-immigration, anti-immigrant rhetoric, really harsh. And he also questioned the liberal democracy as a valuable system in Europe. So it was really really strong, really harsh, this rhetoric. And apart from Hungary, we assisted to a series of other events, similar events, which could be ascribed in the same path. And first of all, the strengthening and the gaining ground of the far-right movements and political parties in different countries of Europe. We saw it not only in Eastern Europe, like in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, but also in Austria, also in France, or in Greece, in Italy too. And we are later, maybe I can speak more about this phenomenon, which is very much linked to what's happening in America. And of course, just few months before Trump's election, we had witnessed Brexit. I mean, this was the big disruptive moment in this kind of trend for Europe, at a symbolic level, first of all, in the first place. And of course, it was a surprise. It was shocking, but it was not something that came unexpected. So the perspective probably was a little bit different from the one here in the States. And so there were a part of Europe which some countries, in a part of the public opinion in Europe, which saw in Trump's victory a confirmation of their being on the same path, and on a leading trend. So for one part of Europe, it was not. It was a victory too. I mean, it was a positive event, and that means that also all the values embodied by America until now were no more considered no more so important for a part of Europe. And that was kind of a strong thing since, it was the first time probably that since the end of World War II and the liberation of Western Europe from the Nazi fascism by America, that this is happening. And for another part, of course, there is also a part of Europe which is almost the Western part. It was, of course, the awareness, a kind of awakening, the awareness that European Union now is alone in front of the big challenges, the global challenges that the world has to yeah, okay. in front of the big challenges. And yes, and the historical ally, the incarnation of values like freedom, democracy, and was no more here. I mean, America First has been the confirmation that the path that America has taken few years. Well, it's not. I mean, it's not totally new that America is withdrawing from its global role as a leader, but it was a confirmation that it was happening, and America First also marked an acceleration of this process. So in countries that has been negatively hit by Trump's victory, this acceleration and this awakening is having also a kind of positive effect. I mean, European Union is a very ambitious project, but it's also very weak, and there is a problem of integration. There are so many divisions. First of all, the one I mentioned before from East and West, and yes, probably the awareness to be alone, to be without America, is accelerating this process of trying to find a more deep union between the states, the different countries of Europe, and yes, and what we are seeing now is that France and Germany seem to be ready to lead the European Union through the economic recovery from the crisis, through the immigration crisis, and through all the challenges that the continent has to face. And so I must say that from this point of view, Trump's victory and what is happening in America is having also a positive effect on a part of Europe. So it's, well, if we have to find one kind of positive thing, I know it's not, it cannot comfort you, but that's what's happening. And yes, maybe I talk later. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Amy, and everybody. I have to say that in Latin America, unlike Europe, nobody expected that Trump will win. And first of all, nobody expected, and until now, it is a big surprise, as most of you, and people just don't understand. And me, among them, I make a living telling Latin Americans, or pretending to tell Latin Americans in Latin America and Latin Americans in the United States that watch or see Spanish language television, what is going on in the United States, and at that time, what was going on during the election, no? And of course, I made the ridiculous of many other people, predicting that there was no chance that he will win. But so that happened. So the point is, as I said, it was a surprise, and people are in several levels, first of all, offended. You must understand, for all the insults to Mexicans, to all Latin Americans, different degrees, no? Because I will imagine an Argentinian person doesn't feel so offended as a Mexican person, or a Salvadorian. Now the Salvadorians are in the middle of all these comments with the Africans. But this is one level: surprise, offended for what is going on. But more important, in a deeper level, is this not understanding why the U.S. will relinquish its role as the not only the superpower, but because it's still the military superpower, but vis-a-vis Latin America, the big influence. Through the years, you know, the United States has been either the bad guy, the ugly American, sometimes the not so ugly American, the less bad in Latin America, but always there, inevitable because of the geography, the distance, being the big country and relatively all the other countries. So always the presence of the United States. And with Obama, we have reached a point where more or less the consensus was, yeah, the United States, I mean, there were still corners on the left that always complained, but more or less the consensus was, the mainstream consensus, yeah, it's the so-called Washington consensus, we have to adapt it, there is no other model, nothing that we can do, either if we don't like this ugly American, it's okay, it's not that bad. It's not only that Obama is there, but Obama, for example, did one of the few things that somehow unified the whole Latin America, which was to do something about Cuba. He did something about Cuba. He changed the policies toward Cuba. So most Latin America saw it as a good gesture of the United States. You know? So at that point, the ugly American was almost somehow put on the back, you know? And yeah, it's great. We understand. We have difference. We are poorer. We are not the United States. But somehow doesn't bother us too much that this, again, this so-called Washington consensus. And then we have Trump, and people don't understand. There is no logical explanation why the U.S. will relinquish his role, why will abdicate the role not only as a superpower, but the leader in terms of free market, respect for human rights, respect of the law, all the things that in Latin America, the U.S. was, again, to the last decade or so, the example that you put, because the left was in no good terms to be an example of those things. So the U.S. was the model. Either you could say that was by default because there is no other model, or for whatever reason, but that was the model. This is in terms of Latin America, and I would like to take a special corner of my intervention segment to talk about Mexico, because all the things that I have said about Latin America are 10 times deeper in a dangerous level vis-a-vis Mexico. You know, Mexico is a national security issue for the United States. What happened in El Salvador, in Argentina, even in Brazil, yeah, affect the United States, it's the region, you want stability there, so the United States can focus in other part of the world, in China, or Russia, or this and that. But it's really Mexico, the region, the country that is a national security issue for the United States. Until NAFTA is you must know the agreement, the free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico, started in '94. Until that time, Mexico was already a national security issue because you never knew what will be the reaction of the Mexican elite or the Mexican political class, either in terms of drug trafficking, in terms of immigration, in terms of economic relation with the United States, and not say the many issues across in the border region that you have to deal with Mexico, water and this, climate change and this and that. And as I said, there was no clear signal of what was the Mexican political class, the Mexican government will do. Always a national security issue. We need to keep, thinking of Washington, we need to keep quiet there because we don't want any instability, because otherwise we risk that we'll have millions of Mexicans trying to come to the United States. And in addition to that, of course, you have the fact, obviously you know, that the United States took more than half of Mexican territory 100 or so years ago. And that was a thing that was part of the Mexican ethos, the Mexican, being Mexican, meaning, among other things, hating, this love-hate, hate-love relationship with the United States. These are the guys that took half of our country. Since you were to school from first grade or whatever, you were imbued with those ideas about the United States. So even if you wanted to love the United States because of Hollywood influence and music and that, still you were resentful that this was the country that has taken more than half of our territory. These guys are really the bad guys. These are not partners. So that was until the early 90s. And then you have NAFTA, and little by little, this perception starts to change. And in 20 years, that perception literally have changed. The United States, it wasn't the enemy. The United States, it wasn't the bad guy. The United States was our partner. Why? Because NAFTA changed not only in the economic terrain. If you were a Mexican citizen and somehow you were able to find work with a U.S. company, with our hundreds of them working doing business in Mexico, you were one of those related to one of those companies, or your cousin, or any relative worked to your company, his or her life changed overnight. You have in a better situations economically. So that is in the economical terrain. But more important than that, or I guess equally important, somehow mentally there was a shift, a huge change, because the U.S. stopped, as I said a minute ago, stopped being the enemy, the adversary, the bad guy, and became the partner. The U.S. was there with us. The Mexican elite had a change of thinking that reflected or extended to the larger society. Always still some leftist segment that won't agree with me, but as large society say, yeah, we like the United States, we like to be partners with the United States. And then, so this framework that has existed for 150 years, or I don't know, since middle of 19th century to now, it changed. And then you have Trump. Again, not only the insult, but in the real term, trying to destroy NAFTA. So the Mexican, from the political class to the intellectuals to the average citizen, say, why? Why they want to destroy NAFTA once NAFTA has benefit both, or even Mexico think that has benefit more the United States than Mexico itself. You ask many Mexicans, they will say it has benefit only the United States. Regardless of who is right in that, the point is that my point, and I think I would like to make the central point of my intervention, is that you are destroying a relationship, a new situation that has been created in the last 20 years for no reason at all. I don't need to go there to the economic impact that could have in the United States if you destroy NAFTA, no? Remember, before NAFTA, the bilateral trade between Mexico and the United States was around $40 billion. That was the annual. Now it's around $500 billion. So you have almost 300% more economic bilateral relationship between Mexico and the United States. You know, have tremendous benefit. The United States sells to Mexico almost $250 billion. There is a trade deficit that Trump always talk. Anybody that has no economics knows that it doesn't matter that you have that trade deficit, because the United States benefits from many other ways. That car that is coming from Mexico not only cheaper for us to buy it here, but that car also has 40–50% of parts that were made in in the United States and just were sent to Mexico to be put together and send it back as a car. So I can say that the offense are in a superficial, anecdotal level, if you will, but the real danger is in the economic terrain, and this psychological thing that after seeing the United States as the adversary, the enemy, the bad guy, the Mexican in general, the Mexican thinkers have changed, have accepted the United States as a partner, has accepted the United States as one of us. Yeah, they are maybe taller and richer and this and that, but we are in the same train, we are in the same boat, either in combating drug trafficking or climate change or many of the border issues. We are, let's sit on a table and talk, and we are not national security issue anymore. We are never allowed a terrorist to cross Mexico or to the United States. We are just there in the same boat, and now all that is on the air. That is basically what is going on. The rest in Latin America, going back to the beginning of my intervention, I mean, one example, is El Salvador. It's a small country, one of the smallest countries in Latin America. If you send, you must have heard of this thing that between 200 and 300,000 Salvadorians could be deported there. It will destroy the country. I mean, it's just the country doesn't have the resources to absorb these people. No, these people have been here for 20 years or so, are totally integrated to the economy, in some sense similar to the Dreamers, that there is no reason why you should deport these people, because they are people that are contributing to the economy, they are integrated in their different communities, but it's what it is.
Good afternoon, and I also really want to thank Jeff and UCI give all of us this opportunity to have this gathering at this moment. It's also one of the rare occasions that I'm here to talk about America, not talk about China. What can I say about America? I really should give a little bit of my own background. I born in China, grew up in China until I was 25, 1986, came to United States as a graduate student, studied astrophysics at University of Notre Dame, South Bend, Indiana. That was my America for 3 years. As someone who grew up in China, had the vivid memory of an experience of Cultural Revolution, because it started when I was 6. My family, like millions of other Chinese families, are being disrupted and destroyed and ruined through the darkest sort of time. Now you think back, you think North Korea is bad, but China in 60s could be that bad or even worse. I remember that. I grew up from that. My parents were sent to the countryside over 6 years, had no schooling, and then I also went through the more hopeful time of China, which is 1980s, when China started with this opening to the world, starting to look at the West, starting to giving society more freedom. One of the sort of typical significant event was when Deng Xiaoping was visiting the United States, 1979. Because that was Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader, a paramount leader then, was about to get into the power. He's still vice premier, but he was about to taking over the highest power in China. And his visit to the United States is a big statement inside of China as well as to the world to say where China is going to go. And he was welcomed in the United States. And I was, how old I was 17, 18, yeah, watching the television. Of course, I remember every scene from the basketball game to John, what's his name? John Denver's country music. And well, America showed where the market is to the Chinese leader coming as a friend. And the Chinese official media is embracing that image, of course. Is that China going to be open, be friendly to America? So for that generation, I was 17, 16, that went through the very dark period, miserable childhood life. But not only myself, it's the nation's collective memory. And then now seemingly there's a hopeful that what is more open is good. The rest of the world is everywhere is better than what China has been through. And the United States is obviously so free and it's so economically advanced. Of course, that's a good thing. That's a great thing. And it seems like our leader leading us to that way. That was a general atmosphere for that generation of China. And even I left China in 1986, but you can understand, I can understand why the students gathering in Tiananmen Square demanding for more freedom and democracy, it put a Statue of Liberty in the Chinese face there, because that is the inspiration, right, that for the generation of Chinese. Well, put a little personal note here. I came to the United States in 86. Like many other Chinese students came here to study. But of course, this is a new hope, right? It's the land I only saw it in science fictions, movies. Or any ordinary American movie looks to us as like science fiction. Landed at the Seattle airport, the first time on an airplane in my life. And I remember vividly, I talked to myself, this is very private. Now I hardly ever share to too many people, that I said to myself, hey, this is going to be my land as well. This is an opportunity, I'm going to make it here. And China is behind. I was 25 then. Because it was so repressive, because it was so backward, because it was all these bad memories that I had, that now I have a chance to be in this greatest, freest place in the world. And so that's a little sort of I don't know what. Then I was studying in the University of Notre Dame. So I was having a difficult time. I had not academically. I could do the classes fine, but I couldn't make a connection to the others. I couldn't make a connection to American students, fellow American students. They're very different than me. And I was always struggling with the question, should I go back to China or should I continue in America? Should I continue the physics? Or seems like the bigger world, I don't know what that is. But I decided I was purposely staying away from other Chinese, fellow Chinese, because I don't feel like we come to America, you still talk about China, you still talk about your past, no, this is a place that I want to learn English, I want to make new friends, and I want to make a new life here. And 1989, when the Tiananmen happened. So in that background, you understand the Chinese students were on the square. They were just like me. The same. We felt the same. We inspired by the same thing. Even I look at the TV, I would say, well, if I was there, I would do the same thing. But now I'm in America. Until the massacre happened. When I saw they opened the fire, when I saw the people die in Tiananmen Square in the city I lived, grew up, and went to high school with Beijing, I felt so strongly that I felt I want to go back. I want to be part of that. I cannot just stay here in America to watch this. So I got on an airplane the second day of the massacre, flew back to China. Even until today, I sometimes still ask, like, how did I do this? Because I wanted to stay in America. In the first second I landed in the Seattle airport, I told myself, I don't want to go back to China anymore. But what happened in Tiananmen, what happened to those students and to my country, means so much to me that I even didn't know of. I didn't know if I cared that much. I didn't know that these things are, I thought I left it behind, but I didn't. And I actually, at that particular moment in my life, I did what I did, which is flew back to China. An entire airplane from Hong Kong to Beijing, I was the only one returning to China. So fast forward, when I say this, then I eventually came back to the United States and became a human rights activist. So that's it for the astrophysicist. And run a human rights organization in exile. And about 15 years ago, I came to UC Berkeley to teach, and now run this website called China Digital Times. What I call it, resistance media, continue to try to expand the realm of freedom, information and freedom expression inside of China. But when I say this is, then my life got this another turn, which I am in America. I have been in America. Now I live in America more than adult years than I lived in China. But most of my day and night, living and breathing, thinking about China, looking at Chinese blogs and looking at Chinese cyberspaces. That's why I usually sitting on some table to talk about China. Even I'm a legally American citizen after the political asylum being approved. And also I'm married to an American that her family is from Europe. Still, I ask myself the question, right? Yeah, how Chinese are you? How American are you? The first time I voted American politics is under Obama. I voted for Obama. But the first reason I decided, making me to become an American citizen, was not because, was for many years, or more than 10 years, I refused to take American citizenship because I thought I was working for China. I was still working on human rights, advocating human rights for Chinese people. So I don't want to take a Chinese passport, American passport. So just for the sake of that, I'm still reminding myself what I'm doing for. Even Chinese government already rejected my passport, so I don't have a citizenship anywhere for more than 10 years. I was just political refugee. The first time I decided to take on American passport, it's because I was outraged by George W. Bush's decision on the Iraq War. I was on the street in many New Yorkers' then to protest the war, although I was also the one that at 9/11 in New York, I remember those days. And I felt, I'm American too. And I should, and that attack to Iraq, to New York, actually make me feel I'm actually American. So I voted for Obama. And the last time when this whole election happened, I was, as usual, don't pay too much attention about American politics, only looking at China and what's politically and how things changes. I noticed how the Chinese public intellectuals or public looking at the U.S. Election, on the Chinese social media and Chinese official media. So that I could kind of have some sense of how the whether the Chinese government looking at the U.S. Election or how the Chinese public in general. Some of them are, I know them closely, that how they see the U.S. election. Some of them are pro the Hillary. Some of them are pro Trump. But I had very little knowledge about American politics. That until the day the election result came out, I was in Taiwan, and a Taiwanese journalist called me up and said, "Do you know the result?" I said, "No." He said, "Oh, the Donald Trump won." I said, "What? You are kidding me." So that yesterday when I watched the President Obama's the clips, I always remember that's also how I felt. This is not who we are. No. And when I say this is not who we are, I realized to that Taiwanese friend, I was American. I was starting to try to defend America. I said, no, that cannot be. What do you mean by he is the President of the United States? And that making me looking back say, is this the America I know of? What is America? And this, actually, the question brings me to say yes to Jeff's invitation. So, well, yeah, even this is not talking about China, it's talking about the United States. But the question is important. All my life, asking myself a question, who am I? Chinese, American, working for who? Since the U.S. government, Chinese government always say, I'm the running dog for the U.S. government. And it's same important to ask the question, who are us? Well, that particular moment is when I react to like, no, we are better than that. That moment, I'm in America. And in my heart, in my mind, there's some image of America or Americanness, yeah, that I was trying to defend. And I'm puzzled as everybody else today.
Thank you. I'm seeing from hearing these comments, we could expand this. There would be if we had a participant from India here, they would be nodding at some of the things that each of you said in differing ways. They would be saying, hearing Junko, they would say, yes, and we could see this coming when Modi was elected. And if there was, we could have other representatives from the other shithole countries, as Trump has said it, where maybe they would say, maybe we should see this as a possibility to form new alliances. If it's actually pulling Europe together, maybe it will somehow pull different kinds of constellations from the third world together. There would be, you could expand this. And are there countries, you could look at a map, what are the countries where there was a sense of Schadenfreude, if I'm pronouncing that rightly? I know in Italy there was some too, with Berlusconi having gone there, and with Russia. So you have ways in which this idea of America changing, America as a positive ideal pulled together some people in different parts of the world, and now what's ever happening is pulling together too. So I asked, the other question I asked them each to think about, but here we'll just have to have it as a lightning round, so we go to questions. Is there one thing, and so just mention it, is there one story or one figure in the country that you're most familiar with, that you think Americans knowing about or more about would help us move through it? Or is there some issue in that country? And just don't go into it in any detail, but just say it would be good with Americans going through this if they knew something more about X. Just very quickly, because I know we have people wanting to ask. What should Americans know more about Russia?
Well, you see, I think that Americans know enough about Russia according to their own experience. You know, the best way to know a country is to survive its past. Now, America has really much in common with the beginning of Putin's era. But there is one principal difference between Putin and Trump. I must say, first of all, that I look at the situation from the point of literature, because now we live in the so-called post-truth era, or post-industrial era, where economy, which is maybe a pseudonym of psychology, doesn't mean at all. And there are no principles, as I said, no ideas, no economy, no industrial, and so on. Only emotions. Like Akutagawa said, I don't have principles, I have only nerves. That's the same situation. And maybe in Russia, Putin's governing is explained and can be explained only by moral and fictional reasons. You know that Russia has an orthodoxal belief, an orthodoxal religion, and the foundation of this religion is eschatology. We all are waiting for the underworld. That's normal situation for Russia. And maybe we hate progress only because progress is closing the situation of the end. So we try to be the break for the world, and sometimes we succeed. I must say that Putin is an eschatological punishment for Russia if he is understood this way. This is normal. All the Russia was waiting for something like this after Yeltsin's years, the punishment for the years of freedom. Putin by himself is not a sadist, and maybe he is the most surprised person in Russia because he didn't want to surprise anybody. Russia suppresses itself. And so I must say that now in the USA sometimes some of liberals adopt Trump also like a punishment. I don't know what for. Maybe for Obama, who was too intellectual and writing books and maybe sometimes asking who we are, as we saw yesterday. Maybe that's punishment for the years of prosperity and ignorance and whatever you call it. But this attitude for Trump is quite the same. And maybe the only reason that sometimes America is separated from Russia, by the way, is that most Americans are sure that history depends on them. In Russia, we're ready to give everything for just the situation of total independence. Nothing depends on us, and we don't depend on power. Power is always guilty. Russia has no responsibility for its history. We're waiting for any event like for the God's punishment and nothing more. In the USA, maybe you can change the situation. That's the only difference. I'm not sure now.
Yeah, well, but I think that probably there's no people in the world who can understand Americans now like Italians. I mean, yes, in this moment. I mean, yes, and not only, and the Economist Democracy Index is just a confirmation of this. We are the same position, 21 in out of 89 countries. Okay, and yes, and why? It's because we had what you are experiencing in this moment. We had experienced it 20 years ago. I mean, no, in 1990 more, anyway, from 1994, when something similar to what happened last year here happened. And Silvio Berlusconi, the media and real estate mogul who entered politics in 1994 and then won the election and governed Italy for most of the following 20 years. And the parallels between Berlusconi and Trump are almost obvious. I mean, they have a very similar background. As I said, as a self-made businessman and who entered politics and won, presenting themselves as outsiders, political outsiders, despising professional politicians, and promising to make their countries great and successful and wealthy as their own businesses. Even if we must say that when Berlusconi decided to enter politics, it was a quite bad moment for his companies, and maybe that's why, maybe that's why he decided to enter politics. And he did good. He was right, because his wealth grew in the following years after he was elected. So it was. I mean, he did the right, made the right decision probably. And well, yes. And what can we, as Italians, suggest you or say or tell you about how to react to this? I don't know, to this nightmare. Well, one thing I think that as there are similarities between Berlusconi and Trump, there are also, as I can see, similarities between the anti-Berlusconism and anti-Trumpism. And that's probably it's something that is good to know and to understand, because why, okay, it's not the only reason why Berlusconi could lead for almost 20 years, but it was one of the reasons. It's because the opposition from the central left politicians and the liberal outlets, the liberal press, was centered on the same language, the same means that Berlusconi was a master in using for his own propaganda. I mean, the level of the criticisms against Berlusconi was very low, was kept very low. They just blamed him because he was him. I mean, he probably one of the main mistakes was to say that democracy was in real danger in Italy with Berlusconi, which is, of course, the feeling was that. But if we think more rationally about it, it's a little bit an exaggeration, and probably also saying that today in America is also a little bit of an exaggeration, especially if we think that in America the president's power is limited by the Congress. So it's not like in France, for example, where the president is really more powerful. So, and also it can be a little bit unrespectful in front of other countries where democracy is in real danger. Anyway, so so using this kind of rhetoric, really alarmistic, doesn't try to understand the constituency of Berlusconi in Italy and maybe in Trump in America, was the biggest mistake, because it turned out to be it became a tool in the hands of Berlusconi to go back to his opponents. I mean,
there is only one example that I can think of, Latin America. I had to mention it. Personally, I don't believe that will happen, which is Hugo Chavez. No, is the more similar because it is similar in terms of attacking the press, attacking democratic institutions, and making fun of everybody, literally, that was against him, and of course destroying the opposition, not killing them, but little by little legitimizing and attacking the opposition. But as I said, I am torn because it's my hope, or supposedly my understanding and knowledge of the US society, that I cannot believe that there could be a Chavez-like situation here in the United States, that the institutions are so strong that the U.S. political system and society at large won't accept having a Chavez situation. But I had to mention it because it's what it is. Very many similarities. But I would like to take the opportunity, quick, 2 or 3 things that I forgot. One is, now that my colleague here talk about China, that China, you cannot analyze, or you cannot see now Latin America vis-a-vis what is going on with the United States without talking or bringing China into the picture. China is taking the role, already has been during the Obama administration, but Obama administration, the US was there. Now the US literally is not there, and not there, leaving the vacuum, the void. China has occupied that space, no? Giving money, loans, no question asked. It's not clear what is the geopolitical strategy, but China is there. It's the first or second partner with Brazil, Chile, Peru, Argentina. All the major South American countries have closer and closer relations with China. So this is one element. Another element that I forgot to mention is that somehow, vis-a-vis Mexico, one of the consequence of the new Trump doctrine, or the absence of a Trump doctrine vis-a-vis Latin America, is that you, as a Mexican politicians, you cannot touch the United States. You cannot touch Trump. Because it's so bad. Your political career can be destroyed in a minute, in a second, if you appear to giving up an inch to the United States, to Trump. You know? So you have to be, if you want to be a partner, at least you have to show in public that you are neutral. And you are leftist, of course, which is the main candidate now in Mexican election that could be the president, a guy that without any question he said that he's against the United States, no? And Trump in this case favored him because it's easier for him to start away. And the last thing that I'm sorry that I guess is that's another, we have chance during the question.
For China, I don't know what to maybe think of that yin and yang, that symbol. If you just look at China, that's the many Chinese traditional philosopher will tell you that there's one trend and then another opposite ones, and sometimes the one on the top, and another time for sure the other trend will be on the top, and they also even in each other. That's how the world has been made, and that's how the world works. If you look at China in the last 100 years, the general trend, of course, is bringing to modernization into the world, whether it's economically or politically. But then there is always another trend trying to fight against this general direction. To keep what they call traditional Chinese, but we're not talking about simply a cultural element here. We're talking about a political and economic privilege. We're talking about structural, so we're talking about social economic status. And these are powerful forces that mixing in the Chinese society that some are trying to be more open and some are trying to close it up. And it's always at odds. Today, in some kind of a miraculously mixed authoritarian regime plus a market economy, the Leninist Party led a globalization context, that China reached to an economic miracle and now becomes genuinely second powerful state, the economically powerful state in the world. And so we can see that the influence is still expanding. At the same time, the political legitimacy at home, it's still fragile, probably even more fragile than 20 years ago. So at this moment, in the China ruling elite was all looking at, they gain so much confidence because what they have achieved economically and stabilized the political power. Therefore, they want to keep that way. At the same time, they are looking at the United States and the rest of the world to exploit whatever the force is helping them to keep the status that way, the authoritarian ruling China. And the US and the United States needs to reconcile itself with the different forces. Yeah, they until you can establish this Americans who we are and the values of who we are to engage the rest of the world. Now we're facing is a backlash of this. And this backlash does not help the sort of progress of more openness of China or rest of the world. But this cannot be simply reversed, but it must be reconciled and resettled within this country among the American people itself. And I'm speaking this, now I'm speaking as an American that wanted to join. I always remembered the day that I was at the immigration service that became America, that ceremony. You are born American, most of you, so you don't have this experience. I'm lucky to have it. So I wrote on my diary, and I received a letter of becoming American, and I want to read it to all of you. Americans are united across the generations by grand and endure ideals. The grandest of these ideals is an unfolding promise that everyone belongs, that everyone deserves a chance, and that no insignificant person was ever born. Our country has never been united by blood or birth or soil. We are bound by principles that move us beyond of our backgrounds, lift us above our interests, and teach us what it means to be citizens.
Time to segue to the questions. I just want to say this has been a great set of presentations, and it has reconfirmed to me the value of diversity, which we've talked about a lot, because last year I moderated a session like this, and I looked for all the best people I could think of who could speak about different parts of the world and the future of truth, and all I could find were women. And so we had a fully female panel, but I think this time has shown that men sometimes also know things as well. So, questions?
Well, maybe he considers him to be a kind of elder brother, or maybe the head of much bigger band. But you know, Putin is sure that he, in his own practice, is opposing now the more serious difficulties, by the way. You know that it's rather simpler to direct America in Trump's way because only institutes can save you from fascism. You know that institutes are very weak and fragile. In Russia, we have corruption. Corruption is deathless. You can't overcome it. And maybe Russian corruption, in its original meaning, just like the swamp of Russia, is the only obstacle of the way to triumphant fascism. That's the reason we will never get it. So Putin looks at Trump with a great envy. Well, in Russia, war has two functions. The first one is war is the universal explanation for all the crimes of power. It explains everything and rehabilitates everything. In Russia, we have a special proverb which says «Война все спишет». The war will destroy any convictions. You can rehabilitate yourself and unite the nation only by the war. This is the first point. The second one is that maybe war is the best way to modernize the country. By the way, Russian science exists only in connection with military production. And Russian rockets and Russian cosmos, that's also the fruit of Russian military paranoia, I should say, in Stalin's time. And maybe, I must say, war is the only way to win the regime, because this regime can be destroyed by any domestic means.
To respond to your question, that geopolitically, the Chinese government, current Chinese government, does see Russian as a strategic partner together against U.S. Power. It's for the balance of the power. Yeah.
But is it for ideological reasons?
Not ideological. It's a power balance. It's a power play.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily economic either. It's just power in general.
Economically, two countries also has lots of sort of complementary deals. That relationship, yes. But economically, China has very deep relation with the United States. Yeah. But for a geopolitical power play, that is the China decide to work with Russia as a partner.
Well, probably the reason why this populist forces are thriving in Europe is that there's no political forces at the moment who can resist this wave. I said before that Trump is very similar to Berlusconi, but it's not. I was talking about Berlusconi of the 1994. Now Berlusconi is coming back because he was ousted by the in the middle of the economic crisis, and when Italy risked to become a new Greece, so the European Union intervened, and so he left his post as the leader. But now he's coming back. And the strange thing is that European Union now sees in Berlusconi a kind of hope. Why? Because in Italy there is a very strong populist, anti-European and anti-politics party, which is called it doesn't call himself a party, but it is a political party. It's the Five Stars movement, which is, we are going to vote for a general election on March 4th. And this movement, this populist movement is going to become the first party, the most voted party in the country. But it will, so that's why the European Union now sees in Berlusconi, which with his coalition, which is very far-right coalition compared to his party and his coalition years ago. He lost some allies, so he had to move to the right. Berlusconi's coalition is going to win. So, despite Berlusconi's coalition is really far right, the European Union sees in it a kind of hope against the populist movement. So it's, I mean, yes, it's not, I don't know, it's so depressing, but yes. Well, there is the French president, Emmanuel Macron, who a few weeks ago in Davos, he said Europe's back. And it sounded, he was talking about the European Union economic recovery, but it sounded a lot as an answer to a response to America First. So probably he's trying to, together with Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, he's trying to lead a different different policy against this populism, but it's not. I don't know.
So the only hope against Berlusconi is Berlusconi.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely true. In China, I've been to China and people have talked about the American shutdowns of the government. It's before Trump that this thing started. The gun violence. There's been a rising number of things that have punctured the idea of America that can also be seen as a longer term trend. I don't know if you wanted to add.
I don't have much to add. I think your experience actually rings a lot of agreement inside of China, that yes, Chinese government like to broadcast anything bad about America. That makes the Chinese public very often disbelieve its propaganda. But at the same time, those sort of the realistic side of the United States, the dysfunctioning side of things, that does make people in the other part of the world, including in China, somewhat disillusioned or somewhat puzzled, which I don't think that's really a bad thing. I mean, if you come to reality that America has that, then the people should also watch how America can fix that.
Yes, if I can, just briefly. I will just add that I agree what this Jeff just said about this image that the U.S. wasn't working properly, dysfunction and this and that. But I will just add the fact that, and this goes to Europe also. One thing is to have a dysfunctional U.S. government, this and there. Yeah. One thing is to have a Berlusconi, but none of those are at the same level of the vacuum of the U.S. not being there in the world arena. I mean, it's not that I am too pro-U.S. I think it's the reality. You cannot quantify the immensity of this vacuum, this relinquishing, this abdication of the role of the United States. Sometimes I feel that I sound too imperialist, will say my leftist friend in Latin America. but it's the reality. One thing is to have Berlusconi, as bad Berlusconi could be, or the Hungarian guy or the Austrian guy, are relatively footnote in history. Or that the Congress the government is closing on this and that, a relatively minor thing if you compare with the big issue, which is not being there, relinquishing the abdicating of this role of the United States. From the point of view of the left, it's imperialism. To me, it's just being the good guys in the international arena most of the time, not always, but most of the time, rule of the law, respect for human rights, all this kind of stuff. So to me, I think you have to, as Americans, have to always consider that factor, that what the U.S. does or doesn't has a greater degree of consequence than any other country, with all respect to Berlusconi or the Hungarian guy.
Yeah. I think that's a great moment to end. There are many more questions, but we need to go on to the next session.